All right, and then moving on to the defensive X factors, we're both going to be rocking with a couple defensive ends, pass rush types, and I think that just kind of shows the importance of finding that spot opposite Bosa. Um, Not talking about Eric Armstead, more talking about the third down role. But Aiden, do you want to talk about who's your defensive X factor heading into this year?
My defensive X factor is a guy who did not play a snap last year and was injured the year before, but I'm going to go with D Ford. Opposite Bosa, you need somebody who can consistently win, especially on third down. D Ford did that in a very limited capacity in 2019, and I think he's healthier than the Niners have said. You're kind of getting leaks that he looks really good in practice. You expect him to be a go for training camp, which was definitely not a certainty going into the draft. A lot of people wanted us to pick edge because they assumed that he was done. But he's a guy who, when we last saw him, we saw how important he was to that Niners defense. He's a guy who comes on third down and really just pushes people right into Bosa's lap, or Bosa pushes people into his lap. And he's a guy who wins with speed. Obviously, he restructured his deal, so he's not quite so expensive. But if you can get something out of him, when a lot of Niners fans, and I bet a lot of people in that organization, thought that they were going to get nothing for the rest of the deal, if he can get back to 75% of what he was, that's just cake. And with the, I guess, inexperience in the secondary, with the exception of Jimmy Ward and really Tart, there's a lot of question marks back there. And so if you can have a dominant pass rush, as we saw in 2019, that only makes their job easier. And I think that your X factor has a very similar role to what I think D Ford could potentially bring.
Yeah, and my guy is going to be Samson Ebukam. Talked about the uncertainty around defensive end, and now it looks a lot better with D Ford being there and apparently looking really good. That's what we've heard. That's what a lot of the beat reporters have been writing. But Samson Ebukam, he's brought in to potentially take over that role if D Ford had to retire this offseason, and that wasn't the case. So you look at this team, you go, okay, well now there's two guys outside of Eric Armstead. I don't know where you're at on Eric, Aiden, but I would really like to see him inside more. If you can have him and Javon Kinlaw just dominating inside, that's huge, because then you got both on the other side. I think Ebukam will most likely, if everything works out well, he will play more on base downs. Now, when he was signed, his workout measurables are insane. And so everyone just kind of assumed that he was this really bendy, really fast edge rusher. He was not that in Los Angeles. And I think I was surprised when I went and watched him. I was like, oh, this is not the guy that I kind of felt was advertised. Not a problem, because he is a high motor guy, plays very, very fast, very, very hard. He is always in that second wave of guys coming after the football. Say running back cuts back, gets away from a guy. He's out there drilling guys. He had a couple really big plays. He forced a fumble in this year's playoff game against the Seahawks. He's a very, very good special teams player as well. So he's a really, really high motor guy, extremely physical. In terms of growing up, he doesn't have the crazy football experience that a lot of NFL players have. But this is a guy that really what it's going to come down to is, one, his floor is really high because you know what you're getting out of him. You've seen that on the Rams. Doesn't have crazy sack numbers. He had 4.5 sacks in each of the last 2 years. Kind of fell out of the rotation a little bit last season. But the thing is, the 49ers are banking on Chris Kosarek to come out there and help him refine those pass rush moves. If that happens, he has a chance to be a really, really, really good player. He has a chance to where, and I want to say D Ford is signed into next year too. They changed his deal upwards 2 years. Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
But he has a chance to completely kind of take over, for the most part, that other defensive end role. And that could be absolutely massive for this team. We saw, you brought up in 2019, that dominant defensive line was why the 49ers were such a good team on defense. There's some question marks in the secondary. Richard Sherman's gone, how is Ambry Thomas going to play out? There's a lot of guys where it's just okay, we don't know. Jason Verrett's missed a lot of time. But the bottom line of the NFL is, if you can get to the quarterback, the secondary becomes a lot less of an issue. So I really liked how they've put a lot of money, a lot of resources into this defensive line, and specifically into that opposite spot across from Bosa. So if Ebukam can come out, if he can become a better pass rusher under Chris Kosrick, because we've seen a lot of guys do really, really well being coached by him, it could be huge. So I think that he's a big X factor. Yes, you know that you're going to get a good player, but you have the chance to get potentially a very, very good pass rusher, which with his athleticism and his abilities. We also had a couple honorable mentions. Jimmy Ward, Ambry Thomas, two of the guys in the secondary. Aiden, do you want to get into them a little bit?
Yeah, I think that we mentioned it earlier, but outside of Verrett and obviously the safeties, the whole defensive back room is relatively young and without tons of experience. If you have an injury to Verrett, corners are looking awfully thin, and it's probably Ambry Thomas sliding in there. And obviously, you don't want to plan for injuries, but that's something that could definitely happen. Verrett is a guy who's missed a lot of time. So a lot of, I guess, pressure is on Ambry Thomas's shoulders to be able to play right away. Was he a third round pick or fourth round pick? He was a relatively early pick. So he's a guy that I think they want to play relatively soon. Makes Verrett a little bit more expendable next offseason because it was a 1-year deal. But I mean, the defensive line is so deep. It's deeper probably than 2019. It's probably the deepest part on the entire roster with guys like Mo Hurst, who was a starter for the Raiders, may not make the roster, which is super interesting to think about when the corners are relatively not as deep. So it's important to be able to hit on that Thomas pick because he could play right away.
Yeah, and the 49ers do have E-Man slated to be outside opposite Verrett, and then they brought K1 back. But Ambry Thomas is that next guy up. And he could potentially beat out E-Man because we've seen that, E-Man and Nkella would battle back and forth. If Ambry Thomas is really good, like I said, like this is kind of this, it's like kind of the same thing for Ebukam. If he's really good, then that's something that you can, bank on, like having him as potentially becoming that number one corner. And I don't know if he will. Like, we're going to have to see how he develops. He didn't play last year. But when he's played in the past on Michigan, he was just a very, very tenacious corner, get up in your face, press man. Like he has the chance to do what the 49ers want to do at that corner spot. Like I love the fit. I thought that was the coolest, like one of the coolest picks in terms of the fit. Of course, I love the Trey Lance pick as well, and I like the Trey Sermon pick a lot too. He really fits the way the offense works. But Ambry Thomas, just that mindset, that tenacity that he brings to the defense is going to be something special, I think. And the reports on him early have been, he's probably got the most positive reports out of all of the rookies, this is a really big rookie class and a really talented rookie class. So that's saying a lot in my opinion. We'll see once the pads get put on this training camp. How he's looking, but I would expect that we're going to see a lot of very positive reports from Ambry Thomas. And I wouldn't be surprised if he starts a lot of games this year. And that's not even in case of injury. Like, yes, injuries are going to happen in football. There's a good chance that, there's going to be a couple guys that are in and out of the lineup. Corners battle little ankle injuries and stuff all the time. So we could see him, have a couple spot starts. But I also wouldn't be surprised if he potentially takes over Emmanuel Mosley's spot. And that's saying a lot, too, because they just extended Emmanuel Mosley. So that could be something where if he's starting week 1 over Emmanuel Mosley, that means that he has been amazing in practice. And that's a guy for me, if I'm looking on the defensive side, like, of course, I'm going to be really excited to watch Nick Bosa. But if he's starting week 1, that's probably the guy I got my eye on second most outside of Nick Bosa. So really, really excited to see him out there. And I just love the mindset that he brings to this team. Also, Jimmy Ward. We put Jimmy Ward on there just because he has been so important to this defense. Really doesn't get appreciated like he should. So gotta give Jimmy Ward some love as well. But anything else you want to bring up, Aiden, before we kind of take off out of this segment?
Really just excited to watch this defensive line play. We saw how important it was to the Niners in 2019, and I think this group is deeper. Maybe you're obviously going to lose Defoe, so you're losing a little bit of star power. But I think that this is potentially the deepest group in the entire NFL. And so excited to watch Bosa play again. He's a guy that I really missed watching last year, and I think people have forgotten just how good he is when he's on the field.
Yeah, absolutely. And anyone listening, make sure to comment who your guys' defensive X factors are. And if you didn't check out the video yesterday, we talked about the offensive X factors, so make sure to check that out. But that's going to do it for this segment.